Akira Kurosawa was a legend in Japanese cinema. His samurai films of the 1950s and 60s have had a massive influence on Western cinema ever since. Star Wars, for example, was heavily influenced by The Hidden Fortress. Yojimbo was remade as A Fistful of Dollars, and Seven Samurai was adapted to become the classic western The Magnificent Seven. I have always wanted to play a samurai game inspired by those stylistic greats, and now I can thanks to Polish developer Flying Wild Hog. Join me as I attempt to kill bad people, skillfully, with nothing but a pure heart, honour and a very sharp katana, in the XboxEra review of Trek to Yomi. After beginning the game as a trainee samurai and learning some basic combat, I soon disobeyed direct instructions from my mentor and left the dojo during a bandit attack. Things looked like they were going well initially, but after testing my swordsmanship skills a few times, I could do nothing but watch while my master died in the act of saving me from the bandit leader. Many years later, as a grown man, bandits were once again on the loose, and I was required to set out with the other local men to protect not only my village, but also the love of my life. Let's just say that from that point onwards, things did not quite work out as planned. The visual design of this game cannot be praised enough. Looking like something straight out of a black and white Kurosawa classic, the visual design wears its heart on its sleeve and mimics filthy celluloid film at certain times, while the limits of combat arenas are designated by what looks like the vertical border of a film strip. No attempt is made whatsoever to hide where the game's main influences are coming from. Dust motes drift down through the rays of sunlight in a dark forest. Fire crackles menacingly from the torii gates set intentionally ablaze, and intricately constructed buildings of various types bring Edo period Japan to life. Cutscene facial close-ups are not quite as impressive as the environmental design, but are still good and remind me of the Swiss horror game Mundoan from last year. My Series X had no issues presenting all of this to me with the game running flawlessly. Our reviews editor Jesse played through the title on PC and reported that performance on P was surprisingly tough. With 5800X and 6700 XT frame rates on Ultra, quality hovered between 80 and 120 FPS depending upon how many particle effects were on screen. Lowering things down to high gained quite a lot of performance without much, if any, drop in the quality of the visuals. The musical score was equally impressive, created from scratch using instruments in common use during the Edo period in Japan, and the sound design was also top notch. Every clash of katanas, and there were a lot of those, reminded me of the Wu-Tang Clan track The Mystery of Chexboxing, which was sampled by The Prodigy for their classic track Breathe. Gameplay consists of 3D exploration sections which switch to 2D for combat. Exploring the local area rewards the players with not only alternative routes to avoid enemies, but also stamina upgrades, health upgrades, a few cool environmental kill set pieces, artifacts and small amounts of ranged weapon ammunition. Combat is generally of the classic sword fighting variety, but when greatly outnumbered or fighting some of the harder opponents, ranged weapons prove to be very handy. These take the form of bow shuriken, a bow and arrows, and a type of gun called an ozutsu, but not all are available at the start and have to be earned as you make your way through the game. Sword fighting itself starts fairly simply, but becomes more complicated as you learn different combinations and come up against enemies with different fighting styles, increased levels of armour and more powerful weapons. I cannot express enough how important maintaining your stamina level is while attacking. The overuse of heavy attacks, for example, will soon drain your stamina and put you in the precarious position of being too tired to defend yourself. Finding a moment to drop your guard allows your stamina bar to increase more rapidly, but this is easier said than done when you have multiple enemies both in front and behind. After beating all of the enemies on one screen, it becomes good practice to let your stamina level recover fully before moving on to the next, as quite often you'll come across a few more bad guys. Combat does make up the bulk of the gameplay, and it's generally an enjoyable, balanced experience. However, it does have its faults. When playing on the second hardest difficulty, as recommended, the combat pacing at times can be uneven. I get frustrated when I have to battle the same group of opponents over and over and over again, and at times I did a little bit too much of this. Clearing 3 successive screens of opponents only to be killed by a heavily armoured individual and returning to the start of that section got old pretty fast. Camera distance also changes for different fights, meaning that when you're fighting multiple enemies, you have a zoomed out perspective, whereas a one-on-one duel is presented in a Mortal Kombat style. In a game where you are constantly outnumbered and fighting foes off from all sides, the controls need to be somewhat tighter than they are, particularly when rolling or changing direction. Playing through on the cinematic difficulty, this isn't a problem at all, so I personally think that the standard difficulty should be really set somewhere between the first and second options. As for the one-hit kill difficulty unlocked upon game completion, I truly shudder to think about attempting that, even for fun. It's also possible to accidentally hit up on the D-pad when pulling out on the left stick to change the style of light attack. This is not ideal when deep in combat, as it opens up your journal, drawing you away from the moment. Underbosses are a bit harder to beat than usual bandits, requiring more hits to kill as expected, but bosses themselves can be brutal. As usual, it's a matter of working out the pattern of their attack and then timing yours to be most effective. I was happy with the way this was presented, but was left feeling somewhat cheated when a boss on his last legs pulled off a previously unseen move and blew me straight off the platform we were fighting on. Environmental kills are satisfying ways to kill multiple bandits, but I found one which glitched when I destroyed a small dam. The first time I used it, water cascaded onto the sentries and washed them down the river. After being killed and respawning, I attempted the same thing again, but cut the ropes in a different order. This rewarded me with the same sound effect and the bandits being washed away by absolutely nothing, as no torrent of water was generated. Shrines act as a one-off save and refill point for both health and stamina. Unfortunately, these tend to be abundant in some of the easier sections of the game and rarer than hen's teeth in the more difficult parts when you really need them the most. As the story progressed, I was required to make 4 choices to choose my path through the adventure. This, I assume, will present players with different cutscenes and endings depending upon the combination chosen. There are fairly straightforward puzzle elements, time sections, and all manner of creepy interactions with giant spiders, ghost horses, and skeletal flag bearers once you enter the supernatural realms of an underworld. Getting in is easy, leaving the place is a bit of a mission. The graphics once again are a joy to behold in this part of the game, particularly as the environment collapsed and recreated itself repeatedly around me. All in all, the game is impressive and an apt tribute to its cinematic roots. Blood spurts satisfyingly as you strike enemies down, burning arrows soar overhead ominously, and supernatural sections are sufficiently eerie and yet intriguing. Personally, I found certain sections of the combat to be punishingly tricky due to the lack of nearby save points, so I'd recommend playing through using this cinematic difficulty if you want a more relaxed experience. Director Yomi is yet another title being released day 1 onto Xbox Game Pass. Why not slice and dice this one for yourself? Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this review, be sure to give it a thumbs up, hit subscribe, and why not ring that notification bell so that we can let you know when we're dropping some fresh content. And we'll see you next time.